From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Four cyber companies fined for SolarWinds disclosure failures. Microsoft warns it lost some customers' security logs for a month. And 67% of organizations say employees lack basic security awareness, according to Fortinet. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have selected from this past week's cybersecurity headlines. That's right. Just like your haul after Halloween, we've sorted out all the news stories. We've thrown all the mounds and put them in the family candy jar. We've squirreled away all the Laffy Taffy for ourselves. And now we're ready for some insight, opinion, and expertise from our returning guest, Dmitriy Sokolovskiy, Senior Vice President, Information Security at Semrush. It's been about a year and a half, Dmitry. Thanks so much for being back. I got to ask, how was your week in cybersecurity?
Thanks, Rich. It's been great. Board presentation went amazingly well.
That's what we like to hear. I don't want to say it's because of our show that the board presentation went so well, but I will certainly pretend to take credit. I also want to take credit for our amazing sponsor this week. That's SpyCloud, the new way to disrupt cybercrime. Remember, you can join us on YouTube Live. I'm going to take credit for everything today. If you're showing up on YouTube Live, I'm taking credit for that. That's because you went to CISOseries.com. You looked for that events dropdown and you found the Week in Review event. We've already got some people chatting in there. Kevin Farrell's pumped for a happy Friday. CCL's in there. All of our regulars. David Spark, the big boss man himself, is in fact even there. So get in there, chat. Let us know your comments, your questions. I don't know, your constructive criticism. I'm not really welcoming it, but if you have to give it, I'm here for it. Can't wait to see what everybody has here. Before we jump into the news, we got about 20 minutes. Just want a quick reminder that the opinions that Dmitry presents here today are his own, not necessarily those of his employer. First up here, our first story of the day: 4 cyber companies fined for SolarWinds disclosure failures. So on Tuesday, the Securities and Exchange Commission, we know them as the good old SEC, announced fines totaling roughly $6 million against Checkpoint, Avaya, Unisys, and Mimecast for their lackluster disclosures related to the 2020 SolarWinds Orion software compromise. The SEC said the companies made materially misleading disclosures related to the incident that further victimized shareholders and the investment community. The fines are a result of a years-long investigation into public companies potentially impacted by the SolarWinds compromise. You know, it seems like the fallout from this just keeps coming at this point. So, Dmitry, the SEC's enforcement division took Unisys to task especially for describing the risk as hypothetical, even though they were aware of the breach and the theft of gigabytes of data. Doesn't seem particularly theoretical or hypothetical to me at that point. I'm curious, what are we to do when the companies we pay to protect us resort to what seems like some pretty shady tactics here?
Based on the stock market response, we are doing exactly what we're supposed to. Unisys stock dropped about 20% over the course of the week. That's a $60 to $80 million loss in market capitalization just for them. I think we're doing exactly what we're supposed to. And if from professional perspective, this is the kind of news I am going to grill this vendor on during due diligence. If we're looking at them for whatever professionally, this is definitely something I'm going to ask, and I want to hear a really, really good answer about what they've done since then, because everyone can make a mistake, but the size of this one and the duration and significance, like all these things combined, I want to hear a really, really good answer, and that may still not be enough.
That's really interesting. You know, we talk about reputational damage from a cyber attack, but kind of in your response to regulators, I think that's an underrated market pressure in and of itself. And as we're seeing the SEC kind of step up enforcement on this, I haven't heard a lot of talk about that, but I could imagine that'd be a very compelling. The rest of the market is seeing these failures being brought to light. I haven't really heard of that before. That's a really great point, Dmitry.
Yeah, I mean, maturity of an enterprise, it underlines all of its technical capability. And if you're unable to respond to one of the biggest breaches in world history in an appropriate way and not copy paste material into your release forms, that's not a good indicator.
All right. Well, next up here, potentially maybe another not good indicator. Microsoft warns it lost some customer security logs for a month. This warning comes as a result of a bug that prevented critical logs from some enterprise customers from being consistently collected during the first 3 weeks of September. This data, of course, is used to detect suspicious traffic, behavior, login attempts on a network, pretty valuable stuff. Thus, its absence increases the chances of attacks going undetected. For some clients, this problem continued until October 3rd. Even though they fixed the bug using safe deployment practices, researcher Kevin Beaumont says he knows of at least 2 companies who did not receive a notification about the issue. Of course, Dmitry, Microsoft is a huge company, does an almost infinite number of things, including a ginormous cybersecurity business. As we know, it's these types of small oversights that provide lurking threat actors with perfect opportunity, especially if they know, hey, potentially these companies don't have logs for 3 weeks and we might have gotten away with something. I'm curious, what's your take on this?
I'm more interested in what the heck is safe deployment practices? What exactly does that mean in context of losing 3 or 4 weeks of logs? I think from just technical professional perspective, if you are all of a sudden not getting data for 2-3 weeks, those are bigger questions you should be asking about your own approach to data gathering, log collection, and so on. Microsoft is just the vendor in this case. We have to be looking at these things holistically, right? Like multiple layers. If we're 1 week off and data is not coming for a week, that's a big deal. So I think by second or third week, we'd already be looking at other options, maybe additional internal log storage and so on. But these are things we have to start considering as well. We cannot rely on large vendors to be foolproof just because they're large vendors. I mean, this is just another proof in that point.
Yeah, I mean, we've learned that when it comes to a bunch of different cloud services, when we're talking about backup or recovery or anything like that, I think at first there was always that assumption of I paid, I'm sure my contract covers this. Oh, it turns out there's some wiggle room there. And as Max Tronick points out, though, too, this may present some compliance issues for these companies. Admittedly, if you have compliance requirements for logs, I would think you would also be incumbent to collect those yourself. But we have seen what you don't expect to happen is the thing that hurts the most, right?
Yeah, these assumptions, like you assume, oh well, it's Microsoft, it's there. I mean, how can they not get it right? Of course, you have to assume you have to assume they're not going to get it right. So if this is that important for you, if this is a compliance requirement, SOX, PCI, whatever may be the case for you, this better be in fact, this should have been a backup to something primary. So.
Well, and that may be why we didn't hear immediately companies, bringing alarm bells, because maybe I would assume a lot of them do have that, but I'm sure there are some people that are caught in a bind. And as CCL in our chat reminds us, the R in MS stands for resiliency. But there is blue screen of death. Yeah, there's no R in there either. So we're all good there. All right, our next story here, Egress shows how spammers are getting around phishing defenses. A threat intelligence unit of Egress is now showing how email services that use natural language processors, or NLPs, to calculate whether an email is safe are now getting manipulated through the increased use of things like random text, legitimate links, or white space. This is based on the premise that if enough safe elements are detected in email, the email security application will be delivered to the victim, despite the possible presence of malicious attachments. It's just a statistical numbers game for some of these scanners. According to a report from Egress, this is due to, in part, also to time pressure, specifically for some email security tools. If an email just takes too long to scan, it will be released before the scan is complete, which you gotta pat someone on the back for thinking of that. So Dmitry, of course, no one likes to wait for an email that is overdue. We expect these things to be instantaneous, but in this case, it seems that time pressure is forcing security measures to cave. Is this something that demands better scanning tools or better transparency when these scans, can't take place? It seems like a low skill threat actor has found a place to thrive by just spamming you with non-malicious data.
And it's working. And if we're looking at the increased use of AI in this space as well, the various artificial intelligence systems would be looking exactly at this kind of stuff. They're pretending to be human. They're looking at safe components in regular email flow between humans, and they're trying to replicate it. So that's going to work. I think we need to start looking at email as no longer a reliable form of communication. We're used to that. We've been 20, 30, 40 years of it, and we've been relying on it. And maybe it's time to start reconsidering that as a reliable form of communication, sort of put it outside of the green boundary. And as a result, yeah, maybe we're okay with it not being as scanned but we also should not be relying on it for important things. Maybe we need to start considering some, for the lack of a better term, WW3, like, the maybe point-to-point whitelisting approaches to email, only between people we know. Maybe it's time for that. Maybe it's time to start changing the whole paradigm of communication.
That's an interesting, kind of, because we constantly see, right, the business email compromise, BEC attacks are always, even if they're not the most common, some of the most damaging stuff. And the only concern with that, I guess, I have is I almost see with a lot of the Gen AI stuff that, like, the deep fake ability of other, things that we would assume would be positive communications are much easier to fake these days. But yeah, you're right. I guess if you had, some sort of, private key exchange, system for a point to point, you have some way to, verify one to one. People have thought of these solutions, but yes, the fact that email, the fact that email is just like, it's amazing. Don't get me wrong, I love web standards, but it's amazing that it has persisted for this long, given the amount of chicanery you can get up to. We have some people in our chat kind of talking about some of the Zendesk phishing abuse that was kind of covered this week as well from the Can I Fish guys. So yeah, we will continue to see these types of issues. It's fascinating though that even though low sophisticated actors, they have time on their hands, and with time you can be creative and you can cause a whole lot of trouble, which I think is the most interesting stuff.
Totally. I think it's on us to, back to education. I think we need to start opening the eyes of our business leaders that email is no longer a thing we can simply rely on. It's so 2001. Now we gotta move on.
All right. Well, before we move on to our next story, we have to spend a few moments with our sponsor for today, SpyCloud. SpyCloud disrupts cybercrime by telling you what criminals know about your business, so you can take action on exposed identity data to prevent cyber attacks like ransomware. To learn more how to level the playing field against bad actors and combat cyber attacks, visit spycloud.com/headlines. That's spycloud.com/headlines. All right, next up here, cloud auth keys found in popular mobile apps. Symantec has reported that multiple popular mobile applications for iOS and Android come with hard-coded, unencrypted credentials for things like cloud services. We're talking AWS, Azure Blob Storage, some pretty big names here. Symantec says these keys are present in the app's code bases because of errors and bad practices during the development phase. Exposing these types of credentials can easily lead to unauthorized access to storage buckets and databases with sensitive user data. The exposed creds were found in at least 13 apps, including PickStitch, Meru Cabs, and Crumble, which have registered more than 4 million downloads each. So these aren't just, some fringe apps that one person put together, at least some fairly popular ones. Dmitry, almost every show, there's a story where I have to look over some metaphorical glasses in a school marmy style, and this is the one this week. So tell me, let me just get the old glasses here. Tell me, how comfortable with the term errors and bad practices during the development phase, how concerning is that coming from one of your suppliers?
I hope I never hear that from one of my suppliers. I also hope that PickStitch is not one of my suppliers or ever comes up to be one of my suppliers. What's the other one? Meru Cabs? Crumble?
Yes.
I mean, on one hand, and this comes back to the previous point about email, we are still wholesale trusting the mobile applications that are getting at best some automated checks on the way out. I think again we need to start coming back to the reality that some of the things we are so used to as well, it's electronic, it's being checked, it's in Google Play Store. Of course, it's been verified.
Has 4 million downloads, so it can't be that bad.
It can't be that, right? We actually tell people, like, look for a lot of downloads. Perfect example. We have to start we need to start first ourselves accepting the reality that this is no longer this is not okay, and this is not going to be okay. And again, we need to start segregating where we do important things and the level of protection, the level of control, level of due diligence we implement at those levels versus everything else. And in everything else, this is going to keep happening. Some developer somewhere will forget. Some developer somewhere will simply not have the processes, the proper secure development lifecycle practices. I mean, who has those in place anyway? And relying on automation to find these things, that's not going to work. Just Just not going to work.
And as CCL points out in our chat, GitHub, and I know GitHub for sure has introduced this a couple of years ago. They do secret detection. I know they rolled it out to private repositories and they went public with it not too long after that. So yeah, I mean that was a huge problem on GitHub for years. It was you put a hard, like a secret key in there, and people were just actively scanning for those and just immediately started doing like crypto mining and stuff like that as soon as you expose any kind of cloud assets like that. So yeah, there are some steps deeper in there. But the one encouraging thing for me is we're seeing greater transparency from the app stores themselves in terms of what data apps can collect. I've seen a little bit of public pushback on apps that just like list everything by default, kind of that, oh, we'll say we can collect everything, so we're not limited. There's been a little bit of resistance to that, or at least some visibility into it. And I hope that continues long term too.
Yeah, me too. Vendors, the big ones have started doing better. GitHub is one example. The visual representation of the permissions and rights that these applications are asking for, all that is definitely great. Maybe next step is to have some standardized development platform or standardized development flow that everyone would follow, that we can use to find things like this easier. But again, may take 5 or 10 years before that happens.
And a whole lot of mayhem in between.
Totally.
Next up here, Penn State fined for failing to meet cyber requirements in federal contracts. The university has been fined $1.25 million for failing to comply with cybersecurity requirements laid out in its contract with federal agencies. The issue involves 15 contracts made between the school and the Department of Defense and NASA, in which the school was accused of failing to implement cybersecurity controls between 2018 and 2023. There's a big window. And after acknowledging the issues, it allegedly subsequently failed to develop or implement any plans to correct the issues. The DOJ has added that Penn State admitted in cybersecurity failings in assessment filings and pledged to fix them, but misrepresented the dates by which it would implement them and did not pursue plans of actions to do so. So not only did they have unrealistic expectations to solve them, they didn't actually even plan to do so. Just phenomenal. So Dmitry, this story seems to differ somewhat from the Georgia Tech story a couple of months back. In this case, it seems they did not fulfill their promises to correct their errors. It's not the crime, it's the cover-up. Many universities would gladly fight for big government contracts, but failing to implement cybersecurity controls for 5 years doesn't deserve any type of passing grade. If true, curious, what are your thoughts?
Treason.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That is so you're mincing some words here. Don't you have a stronger opinion here, Dmitry?
Vast majority of our research and development is not classified. It's in this level of it's in colleges, universities, scientific community that's fairly open. Let's make it easier for our adversaries to pull the most important, the most critical defensive research that we have. And in today's world, considering the geopolitical situation, let's not mince any words, World War III that's happening right now, and the research that is happening in these universities is directly related to our missile defense, satellite, space exploration and defense. This is what's happening there. And an entity the size of Penn State, I get the complexity. I really do. This isn't excusable at all. When I said treason, I mean, that's the level of impact that we could be talking about 5, 6, 10 years from now, 15, 20. We won't know until until way down the road. Okay, fine. We're not going to, put them in prison for treason, but there has to be ramifications. If they lose every contract for the next 5 years and cannot apply, maybe that'll wake up the rest. This has to be very significantly responded to. That's my opinion.
Well, and my default is always to assume, if not incompetence, I always assume laziness first, and then we'll move to incompetence, then to maliciousness. And I'm just trying to think. It's one thing to miss it for a year, which is not that it's any more excusable, but to consistently have this behavior, and then to know you have to make corrections and not make the plan for it. As Max Tronic says, you can't claim ignorance in those scenarios. For any claim of ignorance for that long, or organizational deficit, or hey, it's just hard. Like you said, it's a complex scenario. Everyone would understand that not for this length of time, given the amount of money and import to that research, as you were alluding to, Dmitry. That's the thing that's so confounding for me, is I can't make that claim of organizations move slow sometimes. Like,
Yeah, no.
like that is like a crazy long timeline.
Willful negligence is perfect description for this, and people go to prison for that. We're not, and this is not even treason, right? This is just general basic willful negligence. In this case, I almost want to ask, and I hope someone asks, was this willful negligence versus willful on purpose? Let's not close because someone is siphoning the data out, and we need that to continue.
We may never see like the full investigation, but there is there's going to be a fascinating email chain of failures to follow on this. Like there's like a business, like I want the business school like report on this 5 years from now to figure out
from Penn
these
State?
kind of. Yeah, I mean, if someone can get a master's degree out of this, I mean, at least there's your silver lining, right? Someone got their master's thesis out of this to figure out the organizational deficit here, because that, whether it's willful negligence or however we want to phrase it, it's truly remarkable. I could go deep on this for the rest of the afternoon, but we got to get to our last story here. 67% of organizations say employees lack basic security awareness, according to Fortinet. That comes from their 2024 Security Awareness and Training Global Research Report. It's a barn burner of a read. 2/3 of organizations are concerned that their employees lack fundamental security awareness. This is an increase from last year when the number was 56%. Amit Zimmerman, co-founder and chief product officer at Oasis Security, suggests that in addition to improving employee security awareness training, IT security teams must implement strong identity and access management frameworks with compensating controls like multi-factor authentication to mitigate phishing attempts. So, Dmitry, you've had a few experts on the show that have pointed not to technology, but to culture as the weak point in this process, saying when people are not given enough time to think critically or learn proactive skills, no amount of defensive technology will work. I'm curious, is that what you're seeing from this report here?
I'm seeing lack of acceptance of reality from this report.
Okay.
Our technology is changing faster than people can learn it. That's just the fact. We're advancing so fast in just general, people can't keep up. In an environment like that, the controls have to account for the fact that people will not keep up. It's no longer can we train our people enough. It's now a reality that we will not be able to train our people enough. This means that business processes have to account for this as one of the primary, the basic, the most foundational risk. Everything else is a byproduct of this risk. And if our business processes, and as a result, technology supporting these business processes is not accounting for it, I'd put it right next to willful negligence from the previous report. If we're looking at a process and we're saying, well, this thing is pretty advanced, and we're not going to account for the fact that humans can't keep up, that's willful negligence. We're going to close our eyes and we're not going to look at the fact that that's the reality of our lives. We have to adjust to that. And for that, we have to sort of step back and say, what is happening around us? Because all we are doing right now is trying to keep up, trying to catch up to that. Oh, we'll just train them harder. We'll plug them in. We'll, get a thing in the back of their head, and we'll just watch what they're thinking. Like, that's not the answer.
Just plug them into the matrix. That solves everything.
We have to account for that at design level. What is it that we're trying to accomplish, knowing that our humans cannot keep up? And I don't see enough of that happening.
I first, I love the instinct to not throw employees to throw staff under the bus, because I mean, that's the funny thing, right? Is that we are seeing businesses like trip over themselves to do pilots on all this Gen AI stuff. We're hearing talk about all of these companies. Hey, we're going to be doing no code and low code stuff. This is a platform shift, and we're going to be able to enable all of this, productivity from our employees. And everything is moving so fast to keep up with and not seem to be falling behind. I mean, across a whole wide range. It's not just Gen AI, certainly, but the idea that hey, it's just people aren't trying. So I real quick, I'm curious, what does that process change? Is that we've heard a lot of people talking about, hey, we need to do like just-in-time security awareness, essentially, right? Or like everything needs to be much more contextual. We can't be doing annualized training and stuff like that. Is that part of it, or is it more of a listen? We just can't assume that humans are going to be on top of this just on a very foundational level.
That has to be the basic assumption, where if we have a human as part of the process, we have to try and remove the points where there is an opportunity for a human to make a mistake. An example, we're talking authentication, authorization, passwords. Get rid of them. We talked about the keys from one of the previous stories. There are other ways to do this. Mandating rotations for the keys, for example, removing passwords altogether, switching to some form of biometric. Those are realities we have to start accepting, that if we're going to go technological, let's go all the way to the point where we can not put humans in a position where they're afraid. And if we are going to teach them and train them, we have to tell them it has to be a positive experience at the end of which they're not worried. I see Kevin's hot take about having people fail and take the course again. Definitely not that. I definitely don't agree with that. That's going to alienate the humans. Unless we're completely moving away from using the humans in the business process, okay, maybe that's the way out. But in the reality we have today, that has to be accounted for. We have to face some of those hard, very, very hard choices if we want to make progress on sort of global scale.
Well, if you enjoy conversations like that, because I do. This is the stuff I love to get into the nuts and bolts on. If you are not already subscribed to Defense in Depth, we spend entire episodes kind of breaking down big topics like this. So if you're not, check that out from the CISO series. I highly recommend, because they cover topics like that all the time. David Spark and the coterie of guests and co-hosts and stuff like that do a fantastic job. Before we get out of here with you, Dmitry, though, is there any story that was a thumbs up or an eye roller for you this week?
There were some about similar, like there's several stories about phishing and all the AI components. I look at these things and we're noting things that happen that we have zero control over, and there's no depth to like thinking, okay, well, if this is again, back to the reality, we're not coming to reality. We're not trying to understand what the reality of our situation is. We're just noting, oh, this happened, this happened, this happened. And I think what that's doing is that's desensitizing Thank you. Us to what's happening. And a year from now, these stories are going to go, well, of course it happened. This is normal. We're all living in this chaos. The amount of these stories that are cutting the edge, letting us think that this is all normal, that's the problem I'm starting to see. So I think that's hitting home a little bit more than before, that this is what's happening.
So some cybersecurity realism rather than cybersecurity desensitivity, I think, is the takeaway from this. Thank you, Dmitriy Sokolovskiy, Senior Vice President, Information Security at Semrush. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure when you were on the show. I love talking to you. This was fantastic. Thank you so much. Where can people find you online if they want to follow you for some more of your some great takes?
LinkedIn is it. I try to. There are a lot of stuff that I find there that's really good, and I try to share that, so you can find me there. And I love coming to the show. Thank you so much for having me.
We will have you on again before too long. Thank you once again. Thanks also to our sponsor, SpyCloud, the new way to disrupt cybercrime. And thanks to our audience today. I appreciate everybody being in here. We can't get everything up on the screen, but we see you, CCL. I see you in there, AP, getting in there late. Kevin Farrell, thank you for sharing your hot take. I even when we have disagreement, I love having that because it makes the show better. It leads to better conversations. And we want to know what you think. We value that definitely on this show. So thanks to everybody that gets involved. And if you've never joined us for a live stream, get on in there, get your comments in. It is a good time. Make sure you come back next week for another episode of our Week in Review. And in the meantime, you can get your daily news fix every single day through cybersecurity headlines. Give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. Until the next time we meet, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.